Ahoy there! Captain Benzie here, coming at you with a getting started guide for Magic Manastrike. Now this time around I wanted to talk about how you can climb the early ladders really easily with everyone's favourite pyromancer, Chandra. Now before we jump in, if you are enjoying my content, please do let me know by hitting like on the video and subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. Let me know what content you would like to see in future, either in the comment section down below, or by coming and finding me on the various different social media channels you can see across the bottom of the screen now. Right, that all said and done, let's talk about Chandra. So when you start out in Magic Manastrike, you have access to 5 mono-colour planeswalkers. For white, you have Ajani Goldmane. For blue, you have Jace Beleren. Black has Liliana Vess. Green has Nissa Ravane, however you pronounce it. And red has Chandra. Now, it's Chandra that I would recommend starting off with. You can obviously climb with any of these 5 starting planeswalkers, but Chandra is the one that I would recommend to start with for a couple of simple reasons. If we have a look at her stats page, and bear in mind this is a level 4 stat page, as I am at rank 4, so the numbers may vary between yours and mine. But the reason I recommend starting with Chandra is very simple. That she's a straightforward planeswalker to use. Jace has a couple of tricks up his sleeve. Nissa is all about like using mana effectively. Chandra is very much more point and click, which allows you to just focus on playing the game, learning the different units, and using abilities when they are best used. You don't have to worry about getting any clever combinations or anything like that in there. Now, why is Chandra best for this? Well, if we look at her stats, her HP is sort of middle to low. She is on the squishier end of things, but we'll come back to that later. Her attack, however, 369 at level 4, is surprisingly high for some of the planeswalkers, especially since it is a ranged AoE attack, area of effect attack, that can hit both air and ground. This means that you can drop Chandra behind friendly units, and she will fire through them at her targets. If the targets are closely grouped together, she will hit multiple of them, and she can hit both air and ground, which makes her great at kind of doing anything. Chandra is one of those kind of just point and click, drop her where you need her, and she will get the job done. On top of this, her skills and her summon effect are both very straightforward as well. The Fire Phoenix is kind of a piercing arrow, and Chandra's Fury is just a great little splash of extra damage. You can move units around, and it allows her to come to safety. Let's have a look at those, though. So if we go into the preview, there is that Phoenix effect. As you can see, it goes through enemies in a straight line, so if you've got a big crowd of enemies, dropping Chandra at the back of your line allows you to fire off through there. You can see the AoE attack there takes out other units. That Phoenix as well, great way to snipe off enemy Guardians if they're on low health, but that Planeswalker skill as well. I'm going to go back through these now. That Planeswalker skill is really useful for a couple of different reasons. Now, first and foremost, obviously the Planeswalker skill itself, as you can see from the animation, which is just about to come up now, allows you to leap into combat, smacks a whole load of enemies in that area for a decent whack of damage, and it'll kill a lot of weaker enemies and deal a fair whack of damage to those who are like slightly stronger. Like here, you can see it's a Guardian. But anything that's not killed gets knocked back, which means you can push it beyond other units that are in the line that Chandra is using. Of course, if you've kind of got Chandra into an awkward position where it looks like she's being attacked by multiple different enemies, you can actually do that jump quickly to get out of range, pull back behind other friendly units, so that whatever was engaged with her is now going to be attacking those, and she can stand behind them slinging fireballs. That is a very useful skill with Chandra, one that takes a bit of practice because she is fairly squishy. If she gets caught out of situation, you literally have a split second to do that in, but if you can get the timing right, it's definitely a valid strategy. So basically what I'm trying to say here with Chandra is that she has slightly low HP, but you can make up for that by the fact that her attacks are ranged. She does AoE damage to air and to ground, and her summon effect as well can be used to snipe things from a distance, and as it's a piercing shot, you see it goes through multiple things. Now, that weakness of being fairly squishy, if we go back to the decks, you can see that you can actually build your deck fairly easily around this. Now, of course, there are variations on this particular deck, and it's up to you to find what you best like. This is what I've been using with Chandra and having a lot of success with. Going from right to left, that's the cheaper up to the most expensive. We've got the Clockwork Beetles, we've then got the Haunted Guardian, Shock Spell, Walking Ballista, Hellrider, I can never remember this guy's name, the Stormfleet Swashbuckler, and then the Howling Golem. Now, the reason for these is ultimately very simple. Most of them fill a very specific role, very straightforward, and just It's not too bad is what I'm saying. They're very, it's not a complex deck. The idea with the Golem, for example, is that this guy is just a big, beefy hitter. He's a tank. You drop him on your side of the arena, and you let him wander slowly across. If your opponents then decide that the best way to deal with a tank is to drop something like their own Clockwork Beetles, then you drop Chandra behind. You drop Chandra behind that Golem, her Phoenix will take care of most of them, and any that the Phoenix doesn't take care of, her AoE damage will. The Swashbuckler, second up on the list. Again, this is just for getting rid of crowds. If Chandra is already out on the battlefield and there's a whole load of stuff coming, the Stormfleet Swashbuckler, because he has a piercing arrow that can hit air and ground and has a surprising range to it. This guy, ultimately, you drop him instead of Chandra, and you'll see he'll do that arrow shot. It goes right the way through enemy units. Fantastic way of clearing out some long AoE lines if they happen to get in your way. Now, the Hell Rider we'll come back to in a moment. The Walking Ballista, this is, again, fairly standard fare. You should have these in most of your decks, and one of the things that you should be leveling up fairly quickly, because they do go in almost every deck out there. It's a slow-moving unit, it's got a fair whack of health, nothing too crazy, but that damage is astonishing. 456, again, to air and ground, and it fires fairly frequently. It's not as overly slow-firing, so it can deal with crowds if it has to. Ultimately, I just like to drop these at a bit of distance away from whatever the enemy happens to be attacking. Usually my Golem. My Golem will be soaking up the hits, and the Walking Ballista comes in at range and starts doing some damage. Same with the Haunted Guardian. The Haunted Guardian is a absolute beast of a tank. 3006 HP at level 5. That's an insane amount of tankiness. Drop one of those and let it just slowly wander across the battlefield. All your other units are behind it, and it will soak up an astonishing amount of damage, whilst Chandra, or the Swashbuckler, or the Ballista, whichever, just are punching everything in the face from range. Brilliant way of tanking. Now, of course, there is the problem that things like the Haunted Guardian and the Howling Golem are great blockers and can soak up the damage for ground units, but what about air units? If your opponent's got things like Sheevan Dragons or the blue and white dragons, I can't remember what those are called, then that's where the Clockwork Beetles come in. It's a quick swarm to drop down, 3 mana, nice and cheap summon. But being airbound, it is a great way of just whacking out, keeping a bit of distance, keeping those dragons at distance. They act as blockers and can get a surprising amount of damage in before they die. For ground units, though, things like other Howling Golems or ground units that can't attack air, Clockwork Beetles are a surprisingly cheap and effective way of getting through them. I've laughed so many times as people have dropped something like a Baloth and had it come charging across the battlefield only for a swarm of Clockwork Beetles to finish off before it reaches my Guardian. These are an almost must-have in decks right now as far as I'm concerned. They are amazing. Certainly, those 3 colourless cards that you see there, that's the Ballista, the Guardians, and the Clockwork Beetles, I strongly recommend levelling those up as a priority. Now, there's a couple I skipped over and I'll come back to now. Shock, first of all. Shock is a spell. Ultimately, you can use this for dealing a quick bit of damage to something if you need to. It's 3 mana cost. It's a decent whack of damage. Here you can see at level 4, 3, 4, 5. It is not as good for damage as the Ratchet Bomb of 518. The Ratchet Bomb has a larger range and a higher damage for the creature and attack on the Guardian. So if you are just wanting to blow stuff up, then the Ratchet Bomb is the better way to go. And again, the Ratchet Bomb does go in any colour deck, so it's worth levelling up. The reason I've gone for Shock here is because of the stun effect. It's a 2-second stun duration. You whack that on a big crowd of enemies, and not only will it it'll clear off most of the weaker ones, as you'll see here, not only does it clear off most of the weak enemies, but it'll stun anything that survives, and anything that survives is likely also being pummeled by a Golem, shot by a Swashbuckler, or Chandra. The final unit to finish off this deck is the Hell Rider. Now, Hell Riders are your sort of sneak around the backdoor unit. These guys move quickly, they jump to buildings, and they inflict AoE ground damage and stun on those buildings. Any ground enemies nearby will get hit by that attack as well, but it is mainly buildings. They go straight for the buildings, and they ignore anything else. this means that they're not great at blocking or defending or any of that kind of stuff, but they are great distractions. If you're pushing the top lane, you can throw one of these guys along the bottom lane and deal a decent whack of damage, or if you've just got a load of enemies that have kind of reached the middle point of the lane, they're at the point where it goes from their side to your side, drop one of these and he'll run past that crowd. Your guys are engaged in smashing their guys, and the Hell Rider just swoops on past and starts damaging their Guardian. It's a great little card for getting through there. Now, the Swashbuckler, unfortunately, I think it's a rank 3 unlock, rank 3 or rank 4, so you will not necessarily have access to him straight away. I have had a bit of luck with the Vexing Devils in this slot, because they are fast-moving, they self-destruct, and they blow up big crowds of stuff in one go. As you can see there, brilliant for taking out large units, and being only 2 cost, they are super cheap, so that is my personal preference for fitting into that slot. I just swapped up to the Swashbuckler now that I've got him. The Phoenix can also work quite well, as it is, as you can see there, it's ranged attack of air and ground. I don't rate the Phoenix actually all that much. I see it in a lot of decks and a lot of people talking about it. I just don't rate it. I feel that the egg sits around too long and is too easily destroyed to make that worthwhile. Same with things like the Fury Blade Vampire. A lot of people rate the Fury Blade Vampire. I'm not a huge fan of her, simply because she can only hit ground targets, and yeah, she's very good at single damage, you know, hitting one target repeatedly and killing it, so she's decent enough at taking out big things. She's also fairly squishy. Not overly squishy, but just squishy enough that she's not great at that. Final one to mention is the Goblin Artillery. Some people do swap out things like the Hell Rider for the Goblin Artillery. These guys sit at a distance and swing at buildings only. It's slightly less damage, but obviously being at range, they're a little bit more tricky to deal with, I suppose, if you're not expecting them. If they are expected, though, these guys do die very quickly to instant cast spells, or just to little things like Clockwork Beetles or Hedron Scouts, so do use those with care. Anyway, I think I've talked about this deck entirely enough. I think it is time for me now to actually showcase this deck in action with a replay that I'm going to talk about, and we'll have a look at that one now. In this particular replay, there's me on the left with my Chandra going up against a Korean guy, I can't pronounce that name, I'm terribly sorry, using a Ajani Goldmane. Now actually, white decks are one that I normally struggle with, and you'll see why up against this guy. He has one particular unit that that just causes me a whole load of trouble. Now, when I start a game, I like to be as conservative as possible, unless, like here, my opponent goes before I do. Unfortunately, this case, the Griffin comes down as a 2-cost creature. I've only got a 3-cost to counter it, but my 3-cost does survive that encounter and go through, forcing him to then bring some other stuff down. You'll see I bring out the Guardian straight away and then put in a Hell Rider. Unfortunately, he has, I can't remember the name of the unit, but it's that one that grabs you and just pulls you out of the way, so my Hell Rider sadly does nothing. Now, looking at both ground targets and air targets, the Swashbuckler seems like a great choice at this point, just because I can be shooting both. I can use that as a distraction, bring in those Clockwork Scouts that can finish off that Ballista quickly. You see that neither of us have actually brought out our Planeswalkers at this point. We're playing it very conservatively, keeping our distance, and just kind of seeing what's in our opponent's decks. So here with a Walking Ballista, I can very quickly just deal with those Clockworks. Bang, out they go. That's thanks to the Guardian firing as well. It brings out his own Clockwork Ballista. Time for me to bring out a Guardian, just to get a bit more presence on the ground. And you'll see here as well, that wonderful unit, again, pulls me out of line. I decide now's the time to bring out Chandra to start getting some heavy hits in. I've seen that he's just dropped that unit. This is a great time for my Hell Rider to get in and start dealing some damage to the Guardian. Chandra can try and pull down that Griffin and that... the Ballista, sorry, doesn't actually manage to pull down the Ballista, so I'm put a little bit more on the defensive. This spell as well, I love this spell in my Sorin deck, the one that casts all these little Guardians around it. It's a pain for me to deal with at this point. I have to summon Chandra, and I take a fair amount of damage, but Ajani does go down. I've got a decent bottom board presence here. Out comes the pulling guy, pulls my Chandra completely out of place, sad as I was going to drop that Hell Rider right next to her and have that rush in. However, we are now in Manastrike. Neither of us have actually managed to achieve much here. He's got my towers, my first Guardian down to about half health, I've got his down to about half health, but we are otherwise on fairly equal footing. I do know, however, that he's again, there goes that Hell Rider and the guy pulls it out of range. I did know that that was going to be out of possibility. He does use that to pull my Hell Rider out of the way. I am trying to get in as much damage as I can here. Unfortunately, because of where he's dropped Ajani, you could see that Chandra there was actually hitting with her AoE as well. Now, this is where Chandra really comes into her own as a deck, because I've got a big swarm of stuff coming towards me. She can fire through. Not only does she hit Ajani and the ballista, I can never remember that word, she does actually manage to deal some damage to the Guardian, which I then take out with a shock spell. That is enough. I've got 10 seconds left in the game. I've successfully managed to rush down one of those, and here's where I do my typical split move. You don't really get to see it much in effect here because of that damn roping enemy, but I do pull out the Hell Rider, send that Hell Rider as a distraction along the top route while my guys are walking along the bottom. There's every hope and opportunity. I'm hoping for my guys to walk up that bottom route to the final Guardian and win that match. As it happens, time runs out, but there we go. Good game to my opponent. Thoroughly enjoyable, and that is the deck in action. You can see that it's just all about dealing with whatever your opponent counters at you and hoping that your AoE can do some chip damage, and then dropping that Hell Rider down when you get the opportunity just to blitz it through. Don't be afraid either of using Chandra's abilities to snipe at the enemy Guardians or at anything that's on low health. I have seen games won where literally it's in the last couple of seconds, it looks like it's going to be a draw. One of the Guardians is on teeny tiny HP and Chandra comes down and her Phoenix just finishes that Guardian off. It's a beautiful end to a game. Anyway, thanks for watching, folks. That's all I wanted to cover in this particular video with Chandra and Allah. That's climbing up the early ranks. I managed to get quite comfortably up into rank 4 using her. She's not my favourite that I'm using at the moment, but she is the one I've had most success with, just for ease of climbing. So that is well worth checking out. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. Are you using this deck or a similar deck? What do you dislike about my deck or like about your deck? What changes would you implement? That kind of thing. Let me know what you're thinking about Magic Manastrike, and of course, do come and find my team. Come and join us on the Gaming Galleon Discord. Details should be on screen now. You can come join us here in the Cat Skull Cartel. I'll be more than happy to have you guys in the team, doing what we do best and just having some fun, ranking some stuff up, and of course, filling out donations. Alright folks, thank you ever so much for watching. Do stay tuned for more Magic Manastrike. Yes, Magic Manastrike content. Happy sailing, and see you in the arena.